conversation. So good morning, everybody. It's Thursday, the 28th of March, and this is a Better Leader Inner Circle. And we're quite excited today on this spring day. Although if you look outside my window from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, it still looks like middle of January, but there's hope. Spring's eternal this weekend with the Easter Bunny and rebirth of a lot of things that maybe it might even warm up to 50 or 60 degrees next week, which is a little hard on people's joints and whatnot. But here we are. We have a lovely morning planned out for you, and we have a great friend of mine now, a new friend of mine, Bob McCarthy. He's a managing director for Benson Recruiting, an executive search firm out of near Boston. And if you get a chance to look at his face, he's one of those rare people that has a face for television and a voice for radio, because I learned from his LinkedIn profile and his profile that he was comes from a radio background in college, and also historic basketball announcer for high school programs in his community. I assume that's for your family, Bob. And so we're just going to have a casual conversation about leadership and recruiting and a number of things for 20 minutes or so, and we'll see where this goes. And I hope everybody invests some time, because Bob's a gentleman. He strikes me as a gentle man and a gentleman at the same time, and has a lot to offer you as aspiring and upcoming leaders and people that are trying to make organizations healthy. So Bob, welcome to the Inner Circle.
It is a great pleasure to be here, Steve. Thank you for that kind introduction. I'm not sure if I hope I can live up to all those accolades.
Oh my gosh, no, we've been quite privileged to have the chance to become new friends, and
That is true.
I have no doubt about it that you will live up to that and be able to find. So Bob, we're just going to do a casual conversation. I know maybe you have some things to share, but I think just the opportunity to talk with somebody in your position. So, but before we get into it, so nobody wakes up one day in grade 6 or 7 and goes to school thinking, geez, I want to work at it as an executive search guy when I'm an adult and fully formed in this world, maybe an astronaut or a ballerina or a firefighter or something like that. But executive search seems to be a career path that is a little bit convoluted, maybe, how you got from that point to there. So why don't you share a bit of your story, and then we'll get into the nuts and bolts of the day.
Happy to do so, Steve. And you're exactly right. This is something I love, but a far cry from the lead singer of a rock and roll band that I thought I would grow up to be. But we'll see. And as I say, you are right. I started my career in radio. That pivoted me to advertising, which is really the depth of my career. I've spent years in marketing and advertising, and a great deal of that work was working with companies, specifically their human resources teams, to develop employee cultures, internal communications, marketing campaigns to attract and retain talent.
No.
Did that for, as I say, for 20 plus years. And as that industry evolved, it segued into HR technology. So I had the opportunity to work with a lot of HR tech. I joined a small, at the time, executive, but very well-known executive search firm out of Boston, and we were developing an HR technology platform, first for employee engagement and then for high-volume recruiting. But through the experience, I got exposed to all of these great executive search professionals. Through osmosis, I developed a real appreciation for the work that they were doing, and realized that, hey, my entire career was sort of I've been surrounded by fantastically talented HR professionals, and I could sort of combine everything I loved to help people advance and grow and develop in their careers. So, here I am. I've been doing this for a little over about 5 years or so, and I tell my now adult children that there is hope. Continue, because I thought I loved what I was doing throughout my career, and here I am in my mid-50s, and I've really found what I love.
Wowzers. That's a great story, Bob. It's amazing.
Thank you.
So you spent most of your career working one way or the other with HR teams, by the sounds of it, right? And certainly
Yes.
at the senior HR level, I'm sure. has it changed? Well, tell me about the HR professional that you might have bumped into at the beginning, as opposed to where you are and their perspective on bringing in leadership and bright people into an organization.
Yeah. I mean, we could spend a day and a half talking about the evolution of human resources. I mean,
Yes,
there was a time, I'm sure, actually probably not that long ago, where it was referred to as the personnel department, and
right.
viewed as very, very tactical. I think if we fast forward to the current day, in particular, if you look at the impact that strategically thinking and really smart HR teams have meant to organizations in the last 3 years. You know, going through a global pandemic, many of these people never thought that they would deal with that,
Right.
and yet overnight they had to become really experts in how to deal with the global pandemic and all of the things and influences and changes on society. Really, that all fell to human resources. So I look at many organizations, many people, and say, you know, without strong and talented HR professionals and teams, a lot of those organizations wouldn't even be around today. Um, so the evolution of human resources has been astronomical. The impact that human resources has upon organizations today, I think, is critical. We've had a lot of conversation in our space about you know, not just the value of HR to an organization, but really the partnership between the CHRO and the CEO, and how that has evolved, and the things that CEOs look for in their HR leaders. And you know, first and foremost, really, it's accurate to say today that HR has to be as business oriented as the rest of the C-suite.
So
So
interesting.
you know, the most talented people in human resources are in fact business people that just happen to have an HR title. They understand deeply the drivers of a business, what the revenue drivers, what makes a business work and what makes it, you know, what makes it not work. I find that those are the most impactful HR leaders, are the ones that can really have a deep conversation about the inner workings of a company.
Oh, so interesting, because you made me reflect back on my certainly my post-military career, because HR was, you were the HR, it was a leader generally. You didn't have HR uh, people beside you. But when I got a post army, um, my experience with the HRs were they were the rules people that stopped me from doing stuff. And then eventually, one time, I bumped into like a really powerful HR, as they call them now, business partner, I guess, in a lot of places. And all
Yes.
of a sudden, I realized the potential that was there was remarkable. Like I never even imagined that the help that somebody like that could be to me as I led a team. You know, my career is almost exclusively, well, my working career has been almost exclusively in crisis and disasters and conflict and stuff. And to have that person there to give good advice and help me out uh, was so profound. But it was interesting how I just bumping into the right person in the right place at the right time. It would change this whole dynamic of this. This person's trying to stop me. These people are trying to stop me from doing what I got to get done, as opposed to this person's really helping me get stuff done.
Yeah. It's a great observation. I mean, I actually was listening to a podcast this morning, and again, kind of heard HR being referred to as the HR police.
Oh yeah,
And it's just, you know, when it's when it's working, and I think it's working more often than it's not.
yeah.
It's definitely not the police. These are people that can help not only advance businesses and organizations, but really work with individuals and bring out their best. Give them opportunities to really develop in ways
Mhm.
people never thought of. HR is a very selfless. I will say it's a very selfless career, because you know, if you think about what they think about others before they think about themselves.
Right. Yeah, that's such an interesting way to look at it. I never thought of that either, but yeah, you're right. And they're usually the unlauded department, right? Hit a big sales target or develop a product or get the shipment out the back door. Uh, you're a hero, but HR is a burden, like a burden administratively, financially to the company, and nobody's going to throw up employee of the year as somebody that
Yeah,
helped all that stuff get done.
yeah. You know, and that's a great point too. And it gets back to you know, what I share about HR being bringing a business mind first,
Yeah.
because far too often the human resource function is looked at as, as a cost center.
Yes.
In non-ideal situations, sometimes they even report up to the CFO or the chief legal officer. We look at that and say HR has got to report to the CEO. That relationship between the CEO and the HR leader is critical to success. And I think the HR leaders that think like business people are able to show the value to an organization, and most specifically, how that function contributes to the revenue growth and development of the organization.
It's so interesting. So Bob, it's like the people that follow the inner circle and attend and listen and seem to think that sometimes I have something that's worth listening to say in my blog posts and whatnot. These are they're a range of people from entry level leaders all the way up to CHRO officers for, mid-sized companies and regional banks across America, medical systems in Canada and in the United States. Um, and they are responsible for leading people at some level. So what is your perspective on the HR leader's advice or role in bringing in leadership um, to the organization?
Bringing in,
You're looking at bringing in, hiring, uh, uh, say for example, there's a vacancy in the company, maybe a mid manager level or upper level.
yes,
Sorry, we just had somebody join us. I'm just muted you. Sorry there. Um, so yeah. So anyway, when you're looking to
yeah,
bring in a middle manager, upper management person, leader into the organization, you know, what could you expect from a good HR person in helping you think this through? This is before you even make an offer, but this is
yeah,
like thinking about it, putting
it's a
it
great point.
together.
It's a great point, Steve, and I think today, uh, more than ever, you really have to it really starts with understanding the environment, understanding the macro environment, and understanding the work environment. Work has changed. It's significantly for many. Life has changed for significantly for many. What we find is that if we look at the things that impact company decision making, the things that impact candidate and employee decision making, it's really important that companies take the time and people involved in the recruiting process take the time to understand how these things influence organizations. And what I'm referring to is, quite frankly, there are many things you can't control. Economic impacts, geopolitical impacts. I don't have to tell those that are in the United States that, hey, we're in a political year. That raises questions. There's uncertainty. The impact of AI. How is that going to impact jobs today, jobs of the future? How is it going to impact the job that you're considering adding to your organization? Post-pandemic workplace dynamics. We talked earlier today, and I see it with more frequency, this push to get people back into the office.
Mhm.
That's a significant change because we hear the dynamic. A lot of candidates don't want to be back in the office 5 days at least. A lot of companies are starting to move in that direction. So there's an imbalance there that needs to be at least understood.
Yeah.
And then things like companies take stances and employees take stances on social and political issues and things like that. Those things all add to a level of uncertainty, which I will tell you, I think it manifests at least in one way in slow company decision processes. And I'll come back to that because that's
Yeah.
important as they move through a hiring process. From a candidate pool standpoint, you know, there's highly publicized layoffs, so there's this perception that, oh, there's lots of people out there and available. Uh, Candidates are considering fractional work, so those candidates, some oftentimes candidates are doing multiple gigs versus taking just full-time work. There is lots of competition because, quite frankly, it's not just the people that are in transition or looking for what's next. A lot of people that are currently employed, we find, are listening to opportunities. There's also uh, what we're seeing is, I'll call it role integration. So roles that used to be independent are being folded into each other. So again, if you're looking to add talent to your team, think
Right.
about not just the talent or not just the role today, but how you think it's going to evolve. For example, if you have a head of talent acquisition and a head of talent management, what we're seeing is those roles are now being blended into more of a head of talent,
Right.
because companies need to look at how are we going to fill the role, but how's that person going to contribute as they move forward through the process.
So
More
interesting.
specifically to your question, an optimized hiring process. A lot of it starts with preparation. Uh, Really working internally to understand the role, the desired outcomes, the value of that role to the organization, um, how you envision that role evolving into the future, and factoring in as many sort of change uh, impact, excuse me, uh, external impact changes to the role and how it will evolve, but also the culture. Sometimes people use the word fit. Not every organization is right for every individual, and quite frankly, vice versa.
Right.
Um, what we find is the most successful organizations take the time to understand those things, and then really work hard to gain internal stakeholder alignment, so that everybody involved in the process understands the responsibilities and agrees to the value and the expectations of the role, but also prioritizes the process. Understands um, how they're going to evaluate, what their role is in the interview process, how they're going to evaluate, the timing of feedback, um, you know, commitment to scheduling. A lot of times, we understand life happens and things pop up, but
Yeah.
we see with some frequency, schedules getting canceled. And I think organizations sometimes forget about the impact on the candidate experience in that process,
Right.
and really sort of getting your head around that and understanding that candidates are more often than not having more than one conversation with lots of different organizations. The longer your process goes, the more the more likely it is you're not going to get the desired candidate that you want.
So interesting. So this is a pretty tactical entry level, maybe not entry level question, but basic question. Are job descriptions worth it? Because I remember working when I was working in a big organization, the first thing that would happen was somebody would drag out a job description from 6 years ago. And even updating it was a giant pain in the backside because it was a bureaucratic, policy bound process. Like, is a job description in the recruiting phase of what you're doing, or maybe at any phase, if you're bringing in, we're not talking about a lathe operator or a caretaker, we're talking about like somebody that you hope will grow your organization.
Yeah. I think they're probably necessary in some cases, but really, I mean, when we're working with organizations, we'll use that to maybe shape a conversation.
Hmm.
But really, we're trying to get at, you know, what drives people. Why do they make decision? Why do they make the decisions that they make? What are their motivations? I always sort of smile and I say, look, we can all look at a job description and decide whether we can do that job or not. But really, what we need to ask ourselves is, you need to get in the room with the other people and look around and say, do I want to do it here and with these people?
Oh,
And
so
quite frankly,
interesting.
those people need to sort of look at you and say, do we want to do this with this person?
Yeah, yeah. So when you say that, Bob, uh, as you're going through, as you're getting ready to go to the market to bring somebody in, like, what level of engagement should we be doing with peers at that level? Certainly that whoever that new person's peers are, and maybe even the direct reports. How much involvement would we look at having that conversation as a, I don't know if it's the right word, stakeholders. That's probably
Hmm,
too broad a word. But the people that would be impacted by this new position, because often we hire the person with a conversation with the CEO and a few other people and say, oh, we need a whatever department head.
yeah,
Let's go get one. And you don't have that often. It's my experience is very few times you have that conversation beyond that.
yeah. So we do encourage stakeholder involvement.
Yeah,
You know, people are people. There's different personalities, and quite frankly, in a lot of cases, even in the same boardrooms, there's different priorities. So getting a good mix, uh, good, bad, or indifferent of those different priorities, so long as the stakeholders are aligned on the role and
right.
their desired outcomes for the role, uh, it's a great idea to include those people. Um, Having direct reports is sometimes that's included. I don't know if it's required. Sometimes candidates maybe want to meet the team that they're going to oversee, or some of
Mhm.
those people. A lot of times, those meetings will be set up in more informal manners, maybe sort of a
Right.
lunch meeting, group meeting, or something like that. But a good swath of the executive team that you're going to be interacting with, I think, is important to an effective hiring process.
Hmm.
It shouldn't
Interesting.
just be with one person, whether it be the CEO or not, unless the person you're hiring is not going to have any interaction with anybody else.
Jeez. What a
That
great
probably
job. If
doesn't
you could
happen.
just, yeah, what a great job. Come to work, get your paycheck, go home. Um, Interesting. And earlier, before we started the recording, we were talking about uh, a bit about ourselves, and I inferred that when I was a young guy in my early 20s, like there was nobody self-entitled and self-important than I was in the world, and generationally, a lot of people gripe and complain about millennials. And let's not forget that millennials are now in their 40s; they're not 20-year
That's
old
right.
people anymore. Uh, this generational thing, how is that impacting how does that impact the person, the person that you might want to be bringing in, and B, bringing that person or attracting that person to come and work for maybe a state old organization or whatever it might be? Like, how does that generation, and now of course we got Gen Xers and Ys and
Oh
Zs
yeah.
and Zs, like these people are entering the workforce, and how does that factor in as we bring in leaders into our organization?
It's one of the hottest and most discussed topics today in human resource circles, and I think actually extending beyond HR, companies are looking at this. They're looking at things like AI, of course, and but I see conversations every day happening about how do we manage and optimize a workforce that includes 5 generations. And really kind of creating a culture where there's an appreciation that people do think differently,
Yeah.
and it could be generationally driven, it could be individually driven, but you know, really understanding the motivations, the drivers, the experiences, and the value that each of those generations can bring forth is really important. So I think part of the answer to your question is to be having encourage companies to be having those conversations, and if you don't have the expertise internally, then to bring in an external expert to lead and facilitate those discussions. Because if you're not having the conversations, it's not going to solve itself.
Hmm. So interesting. And so when you're going to the market, I know you do a lot of work in health sciences and specifically in the HR world of that health sciences, and sort of I assume a little bit there's a lot of high tech capacity in those
Mhm.
fields. When you're looking at leaders to bring into a super professional, super specialized, highly technical uh, organization like that, like what part of the broader term leadership are you looking at that, obviously these people need to be technically tuned into what they're going to be asked to be doing or supporting.
Yeah.
So how do you balance that piece, the intellectually technically brilliant person with the leader that you need to get stuff done and motivate people?
Great question, Steve. And we do a lot of work in highly technical organizations. I'll give you the perspective from the human resource perspective, because that's where we're operating. But I think it's a great opportunity for human resource executives to really show their impact and the impact they can have not just on an organization but
Yeah.
individuals. We'll do a lot of work with highly scientific, scientific discovery, or organizations that are involved in scientific discovery. So you're dealing with deeply intellectual PhDs, tech companies, deeply intellectual PhD level engineers. Um, Generally speaking, they don't often think about people first, yet
Right.
they're put in roles where they're in leadership roles. This is where a high quality, uh, strategically thinking HR professional can help that person. So it is a big part of HR's role is to provide leadership coaching, be the voice behind the curtain, so to speak,
Right.
working with that leader to make sure they understand how their communications are being received, the things they need to address. Don't run away from problems. You know, be a support person and help those leaders, those really smart people, to engage with their people skills,
Right.
uh, and help their team to develop and move forward.
So if you were, excuse me. So if you were, we are doing that right now. So let's take a look at, so how do you set, what would be your top couple of tips, 3 tips, 4, whatever the number might be, to somebody as they're thinking about bringing a leader into their organization to help best give them a chance at success, both
Mm,
parties. Like, the world is full of failed site superintendents that used to be great carpenters because
yeah,
they were put into a position where failure was almost inevitable. um, and I don't know your whole work experience. I know I've been in that position the odd time where you've walked into something, I was, holy cannoli, this is awful, and it's not going to end well. um,
yeah.
so how do
I
you, I'm thinking mostly from the organization side at this point, because you don't want to waste a human being's,
No,
that's
no,
a
no,
terrible thing, God.
and you're right. And it's a, I mean, the candidate and the organization go through a process together, right, in
Mhm.
partnership, and um, it really gets back to preparation. Uh, and if we take somebody all the way through sort of the hiring process, the recruiting process, and we've decided, okay, this is the person, it's not done, right? You've got to now go through an offer process, get somebody on board, and through that process, make sure that they feel good about it, because occasionally there are processes that really kind of, they get to the end, get to the offer, and things sort of start twisting and turning, and
Yeah.
at the end of that those discussions, you're hopeful that everybody still feels good about each other, but you learn a
Right.
lot through the process. But the answer to your question is really related to onboarding, and having an effective plan to effectively onboard somebody. Make sure that they have, in some cases, I've seen buddies, buddy systems or mentors, somebody to listen. To bear it down, everybody needs a friend at work.
Hmm.
So have the person start with meetings set up with the right people, the right contacts, an internal advocate for that person or mentor, and have a plan, a 30, 60, 90, 120-day plan, to make sure that there's frequent check-ins, but you're giving that individual every opportunity to succeed.
Yeah. Is there, on the success to make and helps people succeed coming into an organization, are there gaps in leadership that you're seeing from candidates? Like, people, like, maybe, I don't know if it's a trend or there's a couple of things that you're noticing that people, boy, oh boy, you missed that class, buddy.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean,
I don't know what that might look
everybody
like. I'm trying to think.
everybody has something to learn.
Sure.
I actually think that brings value, a gap,
Yeah.
provided it's not the wrong gap.
Yeah.
Um, but if let's look at it this way: if someone's going to come in and fill a role and they check every single box and there's nothing for them to learn, what are the long-term prospects that that person's going to be long-term successful and long-term a contributor to that organization, versus a candidate that might check, you know, 7 or 8 out of the 10 boxes?
Right.
They'll be able to hit the ground running and still, for themselves, have an opportunity to learn and develop in new ways. I think that that balance and that mix is really important. And getting back to the company or the organization that's looking to bring talent in, I think they ought to appreciate situations like that. As I say, there are sort of table stakes that you've got to have to come in.
Yeah,
But if there are a couple of opportunities where that you as an organization can provide a leader to stretch and learn in new ways. Maybe it's maybe it's to gain board exposure.
yeah,
Maybe it's to help a company go from private to public or something. Well, oftentimes you want somebody that's done that before, but you know, get some exposure to some areas that they perhaps haven't had.
right, right. So interesting. So you mentioned we talked earlier, just so people are aware. Bob and I spent a few minutes chatting before we hit record, and then I've heard you mention it through this conversation, and I don't have a full sense of it necessarily, but I have a sense from what I hear, mostly in the United States, but I'm sure here in Canada too, that there's a lot of pressure for speed because good candidates have choice,
Mm.
and time is finite. Like there is a time bound to this because you don't want to dilly dally and fart around and frustrate somebody or lose a candidate just because you have your process. So how do you balance that with risk, the risk management? I'll use that as a broad term, but the risk
Yeah,
of bringing the wrong person in or making a hiring error, but you're under pressure to you know to get this done because for all sorts of reasons, internal and external pressures.
yeah. I mean, if it's if I think in general, if your search process is you'll realize when it feels extended. You do have to, and we encourage you do have to go through your due diligence.
Yes.
That's for both you and the candidate, because again, this is sort of a this is a team sport as you go through the courting process on both sides, um, and have exposing people to the right people within your the right stakeholders within your organization is important. Um, where I think where processes get extended is where uncertainty seeps in. Not uncertainty so much related to the candidate in the selection, but some of those macroeconomic impacts.
Mhm.
There may be changes to the economy, changes to political situations that companies get all of a sudden hesitant, um, and that's where things kind of go awry.
Yeah.
Um, So I don't think that there's too many situations out there where um, an organization just enters into a recruiting process and intentionally decides to stretch something out for 6 months.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Well, I do have a friend who was it's a go with the government. It was here, Canada. It was terrible. Like it lasted 18 months and they were still far. He
Yeah,
finally said, the hell with this. Like he was willing to play along to a point. But I would hope that I would hope that in any sector that wouldn't be the norm, and be in private sector. If you're still farting around after 18 months, maybe you need to look at yourself a lot more than the outside of the world. So,
quite long.
yeah, I just find this whole human resource professional area so interesting. Like well, on any number of front, as I mentioned earlier, like the value of having a good HR person on your side is well, it's immeasurable, I think. Um, what if I was out there looking around thinking, geez, you know what, I'm stymied, this is a smaller company, maybe I want to move forward, I'm an HR, I think I got a lot to offer the world. What are some steps for me to start thinking about, geez, like I don't want to go to Bob tomorrow and say, hey, I'm on the market, come. I'm sure maybe people do that all the time, but I'm on the market. Like, how do I prep myself for the jump? For looking around or positioning myself to be attractive to that next position. Maybe it's an internal position too, for that matter. But
Yeah. Yeah, great term, Steve. It's prep, right? So it's make sure your resume is up to date. Make sure your external profile, whether it's LinkedIn, blogs, however, if you have a website, however you represent yourself
mhm,
um, out in the market, your personal brand, so to speak. Make sure those things are buttoned up. Um, and then, quite frankly, I do say network.
Yeah,
Network's how it's going to happen, and it's reach out, make connections to people you know. Um, Oftentimes, people in the position that you described, maybe they don't want to be public about it, and that's fine.
yeah,
I will tell you that as a retained executive search professional, any conversation I have is going to be confidential. Nothing's gonna go public without your permission.
yeah,
But again, I would encourage people, whether they're in HR or in another field, uh, take a look and do some research and find out, who are the search professionals that are working in your field. Try to build relationships with those people, and it is a relationship. I encourage candidates, people in the market all the time, to that networking is a two-way street. So it's not just reaching out and then figuring, okay, I'm on the radar screen. It, Build a relationship.
yeah,
So if people reach out to me, I say, hey, look, feel free to check in. Doesn't have to be a long process. Every 4, 5, 6 weeks or so, if you're
yeah,
active in the market, let me know the conversations you're having, the progress. If I can shed some light on that, I'm happy to. Of course, through that process, I get to know you better,
right,
and if roles or opportunities surface that I think you may have interest in, I'm happy to share those things. Now, I'm one person that works in a field of many, so there's many opportunities for
yeah.
people that want to make that change to engage with professionals that are I think fairly well networked in the space.
Well, that's how why we're chatting is as I
That
reached
is
out to
true.
somebody and then there was an introduction made and now we're here. So I want to be respectful to your time, Bob, and I appreciate the conversation because like I say, we've become virtual friends, at least over the last little while. Tell me something that's not work related. What are you reading for fun and what are you reading for serious? Are you reading
Mm,
anything these days?
Interesting. Um, yes. So for serious, uh, I'm reading some books on presentation style, ironically,
Yeah.
and leadership style. So there's a book I'm reading. It's called Own the Room,
Oh,
which I
interesting.
would encourage anybody that is working on their leadership presentation skills to
Hmm.
look up. Uh, from a personal standpoint, I will tell you that there are things in life outside of work that I very much enjoy. Of course, my family is one of them, but
Yeah.
I like to cook. I like to cook. I like the outdoors. I've combined those, and I found a magazine. Uh, it's called Garden and Gun. Believe it or not.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not so into the gun part, but there's fascinating. It's click
Yeah.
collections, but
Yeah.
there are lots of interesting curated recipes and cooking styles from all over North America that are included in that I enjoy very much.
Oh, that's so interesting. So we have a guest that's out there, and I just like we're going to wrap up the formal part of the conversation here in a few minutes. And if you have something you want to ask, maybe we can invite you when we're just about to wrap up here. And if you don't want the question shared on the broad podcast or on the YouTube or on the recording, then maybe we could stop the recording. So, but is there something, Bob, that you wish that you really wished I would have asked, or something that I missed that you wanted to share, even in general terms or specific, or there's something, gosh, I wish this guy missed this point because it does happen. I've had lots of failed relationships, so obviously I missed the point every once in a while.
Steve, you've done an immaculate job guiding the discussion. I do appreciate it. As you say, we had the opportunity to connect through a mutual friend, and now I consider you a friend. Um, I've appreciated the opportunity to get to know you a bit, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing.
Yeah,
I'm sure you live it every day. I say it's
it's
important work to everybody, and I wish you good luck and continued success in what you're doing. But
well,
I,
thank you
I
very
thank you
much.
very much for including me in this.
Well, I think between the two of us, we've seen a lot of human potential wasted and human beings and lives harmed badly because of poor leadership and on both sides. And the thought of someone failing because of something so silly as not understanding how to talk to someone or how to manage somebody or deal with somebody is, to me, I think is a shame and a waste, to be perfectly honest about it.
Yeah,
I don't
help
have
help.
sorry, go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to say, helping others be their best, right?
Yeah, exactly. The whole better leader thing. I don't have a first name, but I see we've been joined by a 111 Bob test. And I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, you feel free. And if not, we can maybe call this a day. I don't see, I
Don't
don't
see any
see who
response
no
there.
response. Bob, I'm going to just wrap this up and then we'll just stay on for a minute. And if somebody, so before we hit I'm going to stop the recording here in just a second. So,
All
Bob,
right.
I have to say, um, as I said earlier, I think you are a gentleman and come across and you could present yourself as you are a gentle person and a thoughtful, intelligent person. And I so appreciate your time and your participation in this and also to get to know you. I wish I was a little closer to Boston because I think a glass of wine or a beer sounds like a wonderful evening to share some stories and talk. And maybe that may happen. You never know.
Come and
This
visit.
day,
We'll build a fire. We'll have a great time.
nice. We'll get the gun and garden cookbook out and we'll see what we
There
can
we
whip
go.
up.
There we go. There we go.
So everyone out there who's taken the time, I hope you found this insightful and be useful and I really appreciate the time that you've invested in following along with the inner circle. And we're going to wrap up today and stop the recording, and then we carry on a conversation maybe for a few minutes afterwards. So everybody, all the best in leadership, all the best in your life. It's Easter coming up this weekend, and it's whether you observe or don't observe, it's a time for thinking about the future and thinking about what's going on in our lives and renewal and invigoration as we go from the miserable winter into hopefully a nice warm spring. So thank you all for joining us at the Better Leader Inner Circle, and we'll talk again later. Bye now.